John had been away for a long time. He spent weeks traveling through the dense forests and rocky hills, hunting and gathering supplies for his small homestead. The journey was tiring, but he was used to it. Every step he took reminded him of why he loved the quiet life he had chosen. The peace of nature, the fresh air, and the freedom from the noise of crowded towns. As he walked along the familiar path toward his cabin, he could feel the sun beginning to sink low in the sky. Its orange glow painted the trees and hills, giving the world a warm, calm feeling. Yet, despite the beauty around him, something felt unusual. A sense of unease crawled over him like a cold wind. He had learned over the years to trust these small feelings. His life in the wilderness taught him to pay attention to sounds, smells, and movements that others might overlook. He noticed a broken branch lying across the path, far too large for any small animal to have knocked down. Then, he saw signs of footprints, hurried, uneven steps that seemed to tell a story of someone running or escaping. A chill ran down his spine. John knew immediately that someone might be in trouble nearby. His cabin was only a short distance away, but he slowed his pace, scanning the surroundings carefully. The wind rustled through the leaves, and every snapping twig made him tense. He had always thought of his home as a safe place, a quiet sanctuary from the dangers of the world outside. But now, he felt the walls of his little world closing in with uncertainty. He approached the small clearing where his cabin stood. Smoke was rising faintly from the chimney, but there was an odd smell in the air. Something burned, not like firewood, but something sharper, harsher. John's instincts told him to be ready. He reached the door of his cabin and paused, listening. The faintest sound of movement came from behind the bushes near the edge of the clearing. His heart began to race, not with fear of wild animals, but with the realization that a human being, perhaps in danger, was very close. He had faced many challenges in his life, but this was different. This was someone who might need his help. Carefully, John stepped around the side of the cabin. There, crouched low among the trees, was a young woman. She looked frightened, her clothes torn and her long, dark hair falling over her face. She had clearly been running for some time, and she seemed unsure whether to trust the man approaching her. John didn't want to scare her further. He kept his voice calm and gentle. "Hey, it's okay. You don't need to be afraid," he said softly. "I won't hurt you. Can you come out slowly?" The woman's eyes widened, and for a moment she didn't move. Her body was tense, ready to run again if needed. John took another step, showing his hands were empty, open, and safe. Slowly, very carefully, she emerged from the shadows. The fear in her eyes was clear, but there was also a spark of hope, a quiet relief that someone had come to help. John guided her toward the cabin, keeping a safe distance so as not to appear threatening. Once inside, he offered her water and a blanket. The warmth of the small fireplace filled the room, and the scent of pine from the fire seemed to soothe her nerves slightly. She sat quietly, hugging the blanket around her, and finally looked at him. Her face was pale, and her eyes held a mix of fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty. John realized she had been through something terrible. He did not ask questions right away. Instead, he focused on making her feel safe. He brought her food, simple bread and fresh water, and set it gently in front of her. She hesitated at first, unsure if it was safe to eat. John waited patiently, understanding that trust could not be rushed. He could see the hunger in her eyes, and finally, she took a small bite, then another, as if slowly convincing herself that it was okay to accept help. The young woman began to relax slightly, though her body still trembled. John noticed bruises on her arms and scratches on her legs. His heart tightened with concern. It was clear she had been running from something or someone. John wanted to ask, but he knew the timing had to be right. Pushing too hard now could make her retreat back into fear. Instead, he spoke softly about the simple things: the safety of the cabin, the warmth of the fire, and how he had lived here alone for many years. He wanted her to see that this place, though small and simple, could be a refuge. Little by little, the tension in her shoulders eased. She began to speak, first in broken words, then more clearly, explaining that she had been traveling alone and had nowhere to go. Her story was hesitant, as if she wasn't sure she could trust anyone yet. John listened without judgment, giving her space to open up. As the night deepened, John prepared a small bed for her near the fireplace. He offered her a blanket and told her she could rest without fear. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself to breathe fully, as if the weight of the day's terror was slowly lifting. John stayed up a little longer, making sure the cabin was secure and that she was comfortable. Outside, the forest was dark and silent, but inside, the small flicker of firelight brought warmth, safety, and the beginnings of trust. By the time John finally sat down, he realized how unusual this night had become. His ordinary life, which had been quiet and predictable, was now filled with uncertainty, worry, and a sense of responsibility he had not expected. Yet, there was also a quiet hope, a belief that somehow things could work out. He had faced challenges before, but this one was different. This was about another human life, fragile and scared, and he was determined to protect it. As he drifted towards sleep, John could hear the soft breathing of the young woman nearby. He didn't know what the next day would bring or what challenges lay ahead, but he knew one thing: he could not turn away. His home, his life, and his compassion had brought them together in this unexpected way. And though the night was dark and full of uncertainty, a small spark of trust and connection had been lit, marking the beginning of a story neither of them would ever forget. The next morning, sunlight streamed softly through the cabin windows, painting the room in a warm glow. The young woman was still asleep, wrapped in the blanket John had given her. He watched her for a moment, noticing the way her chest rose and fell steadily, the hint of peace on her tired face. He could see that her ordeal had been long and difficult. And he knew that gaining her trust would take time. Patience, he reminded himself, was the only way to help someone truly heal. John quietly moved about the cabin, preparing a simple breakfast of eggs, bread, and fresh fruit. He did not want to startle her. The sounds of the kitchen were soft, and the aroma of the food was gentle, not overpowering. After a while, she stirred, opening her eyes slowly. For a moment, her gaze was cautious, unsure of where she was or what awaited her. When she saw John, her eyes widened slightly, but there was no fear this time, only a careful curiosity. "Good morning," John said softly, smiling in a way that was meant to reassure her. "You rested well? Breakfast is ready if you're hungry." She nodded silently, her movements hesitant. She was still wary of trusting completely, and John understood that. He placed the food near her and stepped back, giving her the space to eat at her own pace. She began with small bites, eyes occasionally glancing toward him, as if checking whether he meant no harm. Gradually she relaxed, and by the time she had finished, there was a faint, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. John took this small sign of trust as a victory. He had learned long ago that the smallest gestures could mean the most in building a connection. They did not speak much, but their silence was comfortable, filled with the quiet understanding that they were both cautious but willing to coexist. After breakfast, John offered her clean clothes he had prepared, simple garments that would keep her warm and protected. At first she hesitated, unsure if she could accept them. Slowly she allowed him to help her, and soon she was dressed, sitting quietly by the fire as the morning light continued to fill the cabin. Over the next few days, John focused on creating a sense of normalcy for her. He spoke gently about the forest, the animals, and the routines of daily life. He taught her how to collect water from the nearby stream, how to prepare simple meals, and how to care for the small garden he maintained. She listened carefully, asking questions when needed, and gradually, the fear that had once clouded her eyes began to fade. In these quiet lessons, a bond began to form. She was learning not just to survive, but to trust again. John also noticed her strength and resilience. Despite the fear she carried, she moved with determination, carefully following his instructions and even offering small ideas to improve their routines. He admired her courage. It was clear that she had faced many dangers in her life, and though the fear lingered, it was accompanied by an inner strength that slowly revealed itself. They worked together in silence and in conversation, and slowly the cabin became a place of safety, a small world where they could both exist without constant worry. One afternoon, while John was repairing a fence near the garden, the young woman approached him cautiously. I want to help," she said quietly, her voice soft but steady. She held a small basket of freshly picked vegetables from the garden, ready to offer them to him. John smiled, impressed by her initiative. "Thank you," he said warmly. "You are doing very well. This will help us both." For the first time, she seemed to take pride in her contribution. Her eyes lit up with a sense of accomplishment. And John realized that this small gesture was more than just helping with chores. It was a way for her to reclaim a part of herself that fear had tried to take away. In these simple moments, their connection deepened. It was not yet a friendship, but it was the foundation of trust, mutual respect, and shared purpose. Despite this growing bond, John knew that her past remained a shadow over her present. He could see it in her eyes, in the moments when her gaze drifted toward the forest as if expecting danger at any turn. He did not push her to talk about it, understanding that trauma could not be rushed or forced. Instead, he focused on creating a safe environment, letting her know, through actions rather than words, that she was no longer alone. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, John and the young woman sat near the fire. He handed her a small cup of warm tea, and she accepted it with a quiet nod. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The silence was comforting, a shared understanding that words were not always necessary. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." John looked at her, understanding the depth of her words. He nodded, his expression gentle. "You are safe here," he replied. "That is all that matters right now." In the following days, she began to share small pieces of her story. She spoke of her home, her family, and the difficulties she had faced. She did not reveal everything at once, but the fragments she offered were enough for John to understand that her journey had been filled with hardship and danger. Each story she told, however small, brought them closer together. John listened with patience and empathy, never judging, never rushing. In return, she learned that not all people were threats, and that kindness could exist even in a world that often seemed cruel. Their days settled into a routine. Mornings were spent tending to the garden and preparing food, afternoons exploring the surrounding woods or repairing the cabin, and evenings by the fire, sharing stories or sitting in quiet reflection. In this simple rhythm, a sense of peace began to take hold. The young woman's fear, once sharp and immediate, softened. John's presence was steady, reassuring, and unwavering. Slowly, the cabin transformed from a place of shelter into a home, a place where trust could grow and where two very different lives could begin to intertwine. One rainy afternoon, as they worked together to repair the roof of the cabin, John noticed how carefully she moved, how attentive she was to every task. Despite her initial fear, she had become an essential part of the daily life around the cabin. He could see the beginnings of confidence in her movements, a quiet pride in what she was accomplishing. John felt a deep sense of respect for her resilience and determination. That evening, after the rain had stopped and the air smelled fresh and clean, they sat by the fire once more. She had taken the small basket of vegetables from earlier and had prepared a simple meal with them. She offered him a plate first, and he accepted it with gratitude. As they ate, they spoke softly about the forest, the animals, and the small joys of life that could often be overlooked. In these moments, the weight of fear and uncertainty seemed to lift, replaced by understanding and a growing sense of connection. By the end of the week, John realized how much had changed. The young woman had begun to trust him, and he had learned to understand her in ways that went beyond words. There was still uncertainty ahead, and her past remained a part of her. But together, they were building a bridge between fear and safety, isolation and companionship. The cabin, once a place of solitude, had become a sanctuary for both of them, a place where trust, care, and shared purpose could flourish. John knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, and tests of patience. But he also knew that they had taken the most important first step, the step toward understanding, trust, and connection. The young woman, once frightened and alone, was beginning to see that safety and kindness could exist even in a harsh and unpredictable world. And John, who had lived so long in solitude, was discovering that helping someone in need could bring meaning and depth to life in ways he had never imagined. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, they sat together in quiet reflection. Outside, the forest was dark, but inside, there was warmth, light, and the beginnings of a bond that neither of them had expected. It was a slow, careful process, but it was real, and for both of them, that reality was enough to bring hope, courage, and a sense of possibility for the days to come. The days slowly passed, each one blending into the next with quiet routines and small acts of care. John and the young woman had grown more accustomed to each other's presence. She moved through the cabin with greater ease, her fear now replaced by cautious curiosity. John observed her closely, noticing the subtle ways she was beginning to trust him. There was a softness in her eyes, a willingness to speak and laugh quietly when he shared small stories of his life in the woods. Each laugh, each small smile, was a triumph of trust over fear, and John felt a growing sense of responsibility to protect that fragile bond. One morning, after the sun had just begun to rise, the young woman wandered toward the edge of the small garden, her hands brushing over the tops of the plants. John watched her from the cabin door, noticing how careful she was, how every movement seemed deliberate and thoughtful. She had begun to understand the rhythm of life in the homestead, and she took pride in the small things she did. Today, she carried a basket of vegetables, intending to sort them for storage. John stepped out to help her, their movements naturally coordinated without the need for words. "You're doing very well," John said, offering her a warm smile. "I can see you've learned quickly." She glanced at him, her eyes brightening with a mix of pride and shyness. I want to help," she said softly. "I can do more." John nodded, understanding that her desire to contribute was about more than chores. It was about reclaiming a sense of control over her life, about proving to herself that she could take small steps toward independence even after everything she had endured. He encouraged her carefully, giving her tasks that challenged her in gentle ways, collecting herbs from the forest, preparing food for storage, or helping repair the cabin roof. Each success built her confidence, and each mistake became a lesson rather than a setback. By midweek, they had established a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were spent outdoors, tending to the garden and caring for the few animals John kept. Afternoons were for learning essential skills for survival: how to start a fire with minimal tools, how to read the changing patterns of the sky, and how to move quietly through the forest without disturbing wildlife. John was patient and encouraging, allowing her to learn at her own pace. She absorbed each lesson with determination, often surprising him with her keen observation and quick understanding. One afternoon, as the sunlight filtered through the canopy of trees, John noticed her lingering near a small creek that ran along the edge of his property. She was crouched, watching the water ripple over the stones. He approached quietly, curious about what had caught her attention. "I like to watch the water," she said, her voice calm and reflective. It feels peaceful. It doesn't rush. It just goes." John nodded, understanding her meaning. "Yes," he replied. "Water is patient. It teaches you to wait, to move carefully, and to pay attention." She smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of his words. These moments of calm reflection became more frequent in the days that followed. The young woman, once consumed by fear, was beginning to appreciate the beauty and peace of simple life. The forest, the creek, the gentle wind through the trees, all of it became part of her healing process. John encouraged these moments, knowing that emotional recovery was just as important as physical safety. Evenings were their time to share stories. John spoke of his past adventures in the forest, of challenges he had faced, and of lessons learned over years of solitude. He shared tales of animals he had observed, storms he had weathered, and moments of quiet joy that had defined his life. The young woman listened intently, occasionally asking questions or offering her own thoughts. She began to speak more freely about herself, revealing small fragments of her past, stories of her family, her home, and the journey that had brought her to his cabin. These stories were cautious, fragmented, and sometimes painful to recount. She did not yet speak of all the dangers she had faced or the people from whom she had fled. But John never pressed. He understood that trust was earned slowly, and that her willingness to share even small details was a sign of growing confidence in him. Each story they shared, each quiet evening by the fire, strengthened the bond between them. One day, John asked her to help him gather firewood from the forest. The task required patience and care, as the wood had to be selected carefully to ensure it would burn well. They worked side by side, moving through the forest in a quiet rhythm, communicating with gestures and occasional soft words. John noticed how attentive she had become, how she watched his movements closely, and how she mirrored his careful approach to cutting and stacking the wood. "You're learning quickly," John said, as he examined the neatly stacked pile of firewood. "You have a good eye for this." She nodded, her face showing pride in her work. I want to be useful," she said. "I don't want to just stay here. I want to do something." John smiled, deeply touched by her words. "You are already doing something," he said. "You're helping, you're learning, and you're becoming stronger every day." As the days turned into weeks, the young woman began to show signs of real confidence. She moved through the cabin and surrounding land with a purpose. She prepared meals independently, tended to the garden with care, and even began to take small walks into the forest, returning with herbs, berries, and observations about the wildlife. John admired her growth, but he also noticed the moments when her past still haunted her, a sudden flinch at a snapping branch, a wary glance toward the edge of the forest, or a silence that hinted at memory or fear. John did not shy away from these moments. Instead, he provided reassurance through presence and consistency. He taught her how to use her fear to stay alert without letting it control her, how to respect her instincts while still moving forward. Slowly, these lessons helped her rebuild a sense of safety and self-reliance. She began to see the cabin as not just a shelter, but a place of learning, growth, and connection. One evening, after a long day of work, They sat outside watching the sunset. The sky was painted in hues of orange, pink, and gold, reflecting in the calm waters of the nearby creek. The young woman spoke quietly, almost to herself. "I feel different," she said. "I feel like I can breathe here, like I'm not running anymore." John looked at her with understanding. "That's good," he said softly. "You deserve to feel safe, and you deserve to feel strong." She nodded, a small smile touching her lips. Thank you," she said, "for letting me stay, for helping me." John felt a quiet warmth in his chest. It was not just gratitude he felt from her words, but the recognition that their connection was becoming meaningful. He realized that their bond was no longer just about protection and survival. It was also about trust, respect, and mutual care. They had begun to understand each other in ways words could not fully express. As night fell, the young woman began to share more of her story, revealing details of her past life, the family she had left behind, and the dangers that had forced her to flee. John listened patiently, offering comfort and understanding. He did not interrupt, did not judge. He simply listened, providing a safe space for her to speak freely. With each revelation, she seemed lighter, as if sharing her story allowed her to shed some of the fear that had weighed on her for so long. By the end of the week, John noticed a remarkable change. The young woman had grown more confident, more self-assured, and more willing to engage with the world around her. She laughed more easily, moved with purpose, and began to participate actively in the routines of the cabin. John admired her courage and resilience. He had seen many people struggle with fear and trauma, but few had shown the strength she displayed. Yet, even as progress was made, John knew that trust was a delicate thing. He remained patient, allowing her to take each step at her own pace. He understood that true connection required time, care, and understanding. And as they continued to live and work together, he realized that their bond was deepening in ways neither of them could have predicted. It was no longer just about safety. It was about companionship, respect, and the quiet understanding that they could face the world together. As the stars appeared in the night sky, twinkling above the forest, John and the young woman sat quietly by the fire. The crackle of the flames filled the space between them, but the silence was not empty. It was full of trust, care, and the beginnings of a connection that would continue to grow. John knew that their journey was far from over. But he also knew that they had taken the most important steps, the steps toward understanding, acceptance, and the slow, steady building of trust. In those quiet nights by the fire, as they shared stories, laughter, and moments of reflection, John realized that their lives were now intertwined. The young woman, once terrified and alone, was beginning to discover her own strength. And John, who had lived so long in solitude, was beginning to understand the power of compassion, patience, and human connection. Together, they were learning that even in the face of uncertainty and fear, trust and care could create something truly remarkable. The days had grown warmer, and the cabin was filled with sunlight streaming through the windows. The young woman had become more comfortable in her surroundings, and John could see the quiet strength in her movements and the thoughtful way she approached each task. She no longer flinched at every small noise, nor did her eyes dart nervously to every shadow. Yet beneath her calm exterior, there was still a quiet intensity, a resilience born from the dangers she had faced. John admired it. He had watched her grow from a frightened, wary stranger into someone capable of acting with courage and independence. One morning, as John prepared food near the small kitchen, the young woman approached him carrying a basket filled with herbs and wildflowers she had gathered from the forest. She placed it gently on the table, the bright colors of the flowers contrasting beautifully with the green herbs. John looked at her with appreciation. "You've done well," he said. "These will help us with cooking and healing. You have a good eye for the best plants." She smiled faintly, a mix of pride and modesty. I like learning," she said softly. "I want to help. I want to know more." John nodded, pleased with her determination. "And you are learning quickly. You're very capable." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. There was a sense of gratitude, yes, but also a deeper recognition of their growing connection. John had always been careful to maintain boundaries. He knew that trust and respect were essential, but he could feel the subtle shift. Their relationship was no longer just about protection and safety. There was a bond forming, quiet yet powerful, rooted in shared experience and mutual respect. As the days continued, their routines became more intricate. The young woman helped with chores, but she also began to take initiative, suggesting ways to improve the garden or ways to make the cabin more comfortable. John encouraged her ideas, praising her insight and patience. Their teamwork became seamless, a reflection of trust that went beyond words. She no longer saw him as just a protector. She saw him as a companion, someone who could guide her, but also listen to her thoughts and respect her opinions. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky and painted the cabin walls in warm orange light, the young woman began to speak about her past more openly. She told John stories of her family and her community, of traditions and customs that shaped her understanding of the world. She spoke of challenges she had faced, of moments of fear and moments of bravery, and of the journey that had brought her to his cabin. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed the emotions she felt: sorrow, loss, and hope intertwined. John listened intently, never interrupting, never judging. He realized that these stories were more than just accounts of the past. They were a way for her to reclaim her identity, to assert her strength and autonomy. By sharing them, she was taking control of her narrative, and he felt honored to be trusted with it. As the evening wore on, a quiet moment settled between them. She looked at John with a steady gaze and said something unexpected. "I am your wife." John froze for a moment, taken aback by her words. It was not what he had anticipated, nor was it something he could immediately understand. She looked at him earnestly, her eyes calm and serious. There was no jest, no confusion, only a declaration that carried meaning far deeper than the simple words themselves. He realized that her statement was rooted in her cultural tradition, where loyalty, survival, and trust could create bonds that might seem unusual to outsiders. Her words were not a claim in the way he had known marriage to be, but rather a reflection of the bond they had formed through mutual care, protection, and shared experiences. She had survived, she had trusted him, and in her tradition, such a bond could be recognized in this way. John felt a mixture of emotions: surprise, respect, and deep contemplation. He understood that this was a pivotal moment, a turning point in their relationship. He did not respond immediately, knowing that his words had to honor her culture and her perspective. Instead, he sat quietly, allowing her declaration to settle in his mind, feeling the weight of trust and responsibility it implied. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice calm and careful. I understand," he said. "I respect what you are saying, and I will honor it. You are safe here, and I will continue to protect you." Her eyes softened, a faint smile appearing for the first time in several days. She seemed relieved that her words had been received without judgment or rejection. In that moment, John realized that their connection had deepened in ways he had not fully anticipated. It was no longer just about safety and survival. It was about understanding, respect, and the quiet recognition of a bond that transcended conventional boundaries. Over the following days, John and the young woman navigated this new reality with care. Their routines continued, but there was an unspoken awareness between them of the bond they now shared. She began to take even more initiative, helping with tasks that required judgment and foresight, while John continued to provide guidance and support. Together, they managed the cabin, the garden, and the surrounding land with a harmony that grew stronger with each passing day. John also noticed the small ways in which she expressed her gratitude and trust. A gentle smile, a thoughtful gesture, or a quiet word of encouragement became symbols of the deepening bond between them. He understood that trust was fragile, but with patience and care, it could grow into something meaningful and lasting. Their relationship was evolving, shaped not only by their shared experiences, but also by their willingness to understand and respect each other. One afternoon, as they worked together to repair a section of the cabin roof, the young woman paused to look at John. I feel like I belong here," she said quietly. "Not just in this place, but with you. I feel safe." John felt a warmth in his chest, a mixture of pride and compassion. "And you do belong here," he said. "You have every right to be safe, to be strong, and to be yourself." Her eyes glistened slightly, and she nodded, understanding the depth of his words. In that simple exchange, they both realized that their bond was now based on more than survival. It was based on trust, respect, and a shared commitment to each other's well-being. As the days turned into weeks, John continued to teach her new skills: how to track animals in the forest, how to identify edible plants, and how to navigate the wilderness safely. She absorbed each lesson with determination, and he admired her resilience and courage. Yet, he also made sure to allow her moments of rest and reflection, understanding that growth required balance. Their evenings remained filled with stories and quiet conversation. They spoke of the past, of dreams for the future, and of the lessons learned from life in the wilderness. Through these exchanges, they discovered common ground and shared values, strengthening their connection and deepening their understanding of one another. One night, as the fire crackled warmly in the cabin, the young woman spoke softly, her voice filled with sincerity. "I trust you completely," she said. "I know you will protect me, and I will stand by you too." John nodded, moved by the depth of her words. "And I trust you," he replied. "We will face whatever comes together, and we will do so with care and respect." In that moment, they both understood the true meaning of their bond. It was not just about safety, survival, or cultural tradition. It was about mutual respect, trust, and the quiet understanding that they could rely on each other no matter what challenges lay ahead. The following days were filled with renewed energy and purpose. They worked together with greater harmony, planned for the future, and shared more openly about their thoughts and feelings. The young woman's confidence continued to grow, and John felt a deep sense of pride in her progress. He realized that their bond had become a source of strength for both of them, providing comfort, guidance, and a shared sense of purpose. Even in moments of difficulty, a sudden storm, a challenging task, or a reminder of past fears, they faced the challenges together. John's steady presence and her growing confidence created a balance that allowed them to navigate the complexities of life in the wilderness with resilience and grace. As the sun set over the horizon, casting golden light across the forest, John and the young woman sat quietly by the fire. They shared a sense of calm and understanding, a recognition that their lives had become intertwined in a profound and meaningful way. The bond they had formed was now unshakable, built on trust, respect, and the courage to face the world together. And though the future remained uncertain, they both knew one thing with certainty: They would face it side by side, guided by compassion, understanding, and the quiet strength of a connection forged through care and trust. Life at the cabin had settled into a gentle rhythm. John and the young woman had spent months building trust, learning from each other, and adjusting to the quiet routines of their shared life. The cabin was no longer just a shelter. It had become a home filled with warmth, laughter, and a sense of partnership. Their bond, rooted in trust and care, had grown stronger with each passing day, creating a life that neither had expected, but both had embraced. Mornings were calm and peaceful. The sun rose over the hills, casting golden light across the trees and the small clearing where the cabin stood. The young woman moved through the cabin with confidence, preparing breakfast and checking the garden for the ripest vegetables. John admired her attentiveness and skill. She had grown strong, capable, and independent. Yet she still carried the quiet grace that had first drawn him to her resilience. They worked together seamlessly, each action in harmony with the other, from cooking to tending the small animals or repairing fences. One morning, John noticed her standing near the edge of the garden, staring thoughtfully at the forest beyond. She was quiet, her expression reflective, and John approached her slowly. "Thinking about the forest?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Yes, I sometimes wonder about the world beyond, about what else is out there. But I also feel safe here, with you." John smiled softly. "The world is big and full of surprises," he said. "But this is home, and here you are safe. Together we can face anything that comes our way." She looked at him with gratitude, her eyes reflecting the trust and respect they had built. "I know," she said. "And I want to stay. I want to help, to be part of this life. With you." Their days continued in this shared rhythm. Afternoons were often spent exploring the forest or gathering resources. John taught her new skills, how to identify edible plants, track animals, and find clean water sources. She listened carefully, applying what she learned with precision. Her confidence grew with every task, and John could see that her fear of the world had been replaced by a quiet strength and determination. Evenings were their time for reflection. They would sit by the fire, sharing stories of the past, thoughts about the present, and hopes for the future. Their conversations were filled with laughter, curiosity, and a deep sense of understanding. The young woman began to speak more freely about her dreams, her hopes, and the things she had once believed were impossible. John listened patiently, offering encouragement and guidance, knowing that her growth was as important as her safety. One evening, as the stars filled the night sky, the young woman spoke with a gentle seriousness. "I feel, connected, not just to this place, but to you. I feel like I belong." John nodded, his heart warmed by her words. "You do belong," he said. "Here, with this home, with me. We face life together, and we protect each other. That is what matters." Her smile was soft, but it held a quiet strength. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for trusting me, for teaching me, for being here." John felt a deep sense of fulfillment. It was not just about helping her survive. It was about the partnership they had formed, the mutual respect and trust that had grown over time. They had faced challenges, uncertainty, and fear together, and now they shared a life built on understanding and care. As weeks turned into months, their lives grew even more intertwined. They celebrated small victories, a particularly good harvest from the garden, the repair of the cabin roof without mishap, the first signs of spring flowers blooming. Each success was shared, and each challenge faced together strengthened their connection. They had created a life that was simple but meaningful, filled with purpose, mutual support, and quiet joy. One day, while working to build a small extension to the cabin, the young woman paused to look at John. I have been thinking, she said, about the future, about how we live together, about us. John listened attentively, sensing the significance in her words. She continued, I want to continue learning, continue helping. I want to be your partner in everything, not just here but in life. I trust you, and I want to share this life with you. John felt a profound warmth in his chest. He understood the depth of her commitment, and he knew that his own feelings had grown in kind. He had come to care for her deeply, not just as someone he protected, but as a true companion and equal. I want that too, he said. We have built something strong here. Together we will face life side by side, and we will make this home a place of safety, care, and happiness. Her eyes lit up, a mixture of relief, joy, and pride. She nodded, understanding that their lives had now been joined in a bond that went beyond words, a bond of trust, respect, and mutual care. Over time, their partnership flourished. They shared responsibilities, celebrated small joys, and supported each other through difficulties. The young woman became skilled in all aspects of life at the cabin, from cooking to gardening, from tending animals to exploring the forest safely. John admired her growth, and he found joy in the way she embraced life with courage and determination. They also took moments to enjoy the simple pleasures of life together. They watched sunsets, listened to the gentle flow of the nearby creek, and sometimes sat quietly under the stars, simply appreciating each other's presence. These quiet moments strengthened their connection, reinforcing the trust and respect that had become the foundation of their relationship. One crisp morning, John and the young woman walked together through the forest, collecting herbs and examining plants for the garden. She paused to admire a cluster of wildflowers, holding them gently in her hands. These are beautiful, she said softly. It feels good to notice small things like this, to appreciate life. John smiled. Yes, life has many simple treasures, and when you take the time to notice them, you realize how much beauty there is around us. She looked at him with admiration. I am learning that, she said, and I am learning so much from you. Their bond continued to deepen, grounded in shared experience, mutual respect, and care. They had faced uncertainty, danger, and fear together, and now they looked forward to a future built on trust and understanding. The cabin had become a true home, not just a place of shelter, but a space where both of them could grow, learn, and live fully. As the sun set one evening, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, John and the young woman sat together by the fire. They spoke quietly of their hopes for the coming seasons, of new skills to learn, and of ways to make their home even more comfortable. There was laughter, gentle teasing, and moments of silence that spoke volumes. They were no longer just teacher and student, protector and protected. They were partners in life, equals who shared responsibility, care, and trust. In the quiet of the night, as the stars sparkled above, they reflected on how far they had come. The young woman, once frightened and alone, had grown into someone confident, strong, and independent. John, who had lived so long in solitude, had discovered the joy of connection, companionship, and shared purpose. Together, they had created a life filled with meaning, safety, and hope. Through every challenge, every moment of uncertainty, they had learned the power of trust, patience, and understanding. Their bond, forged through care, resilience, and shared experience, had become unshakable. And though the world beyond the forest remained unknown, they knew that they could face it together, with courage, wisdom, and a deep respect for each other. Their life at the cabin continued in quiet harmony. They built, tended, and explored together. They faced hardships with calm determination and celebrated joys with gratitude. And through it all, the young woman's quiet declaration, "I am your wife," remained a reminder of the trust, loyalty, and connection that had brought them together. It was a bond that transcended simple words, a bond of partnership, care, and mutual respect that would guide them through all the days to come. And as the fire crackled softly in the cabin each night, John and the young woman sat side by side, looking toward the future with hope and certainty. Together they had created a life of purpose, trust, and companionship. And together they would continue to grow, to learn, and to face whatever came their way, side by side, as equals, friends, and partners in life.